Well, hi, Shaun Humphries here. Welcome to All Things Retirement. I've had the opportunity over the last several years to have literally thousands of conversations with people getting ready to retire. And we've done as a team hundreds of retirement income plans. And as you go through those conversations, there's a lot that you learn. And in this video, I'm going to talk about 4 surprise expenses that come up for people. So these are really important areas to take into account when you do your retirement income planning. So I'm going to save you some pain and frustration by covering off these 4 surprise expenses and some thoughts about how you can deal with them effectively so that they don't come back to bite you in retirement. So before we cover off the first retirement planning expense surprise, make sure you go to the show notes. There's a link to free resources to help you in retirement planning. As well, we have a second opinion service. It's complimentary as well. In the show notes is a link back to our website that outlines how you can start a conversation and get feedback about our gap retirement conversation. Okay, let's cover off the first retirement expense surprise. The first surprise expense is long-term care costs. I'm always surprised when I sit down with a couple or individual for the first time and start talking about the retirement, and they're excited about how much they want to spend and the traveling they want to do and looking at their discretionary expenses. That's all wonderful, but very seldom do they ask questions about, at the back end of my retirement, Shaun, what has your experience been in terms of health costs, long-term care costs? What are the potential impacts? So I'm usually the one that has to bring that up when I'm talking to families planning for retirement. I think it's partially they just don't want to deal with the issue, or they think, well, we'll figure it out, or as a family, we'll figure it out. That's not how you want to plan for this, because it is a surprisingly high cost and expense that can happen. And we're going to take a look at some of the facts around long-term care, and then just a couple of quick strategy ideas about how you can plan for it. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the subsidized side of long-term care. We're going to talk about the more private side. That would be the preference for most families if they can afford it. And so private long-term care or retirement homes. And so if you look across the board, it's quite variable depending on the province and the city or jurisdiction you live in. But private retirement homes, anywhere from $2,500 to $6,000 per month easily. And you're probably talking more in that sort of $5,000 to $6,000 per month. That's pretty typical out there. Memory care units, now you're getting into some pretty significant costs. I haven't seen $4,000 per month. We just had a client go into memory care, and they were spending $8,000 per month, and that was in Winnipeg. So I suspect in most large cities, memory care units would be at least that. And then we get into in-home care. You can talk $10,000 per month to sort of bring in all the support services in-house. So you can see right away we're talking fairly significant dollars. So the reason we bring this up is that when you look at the later stages of life, often it's not a go-go, slow-go, no-go. It is a go-go, maybe a slow-go, and even though it might be no-go, you're going to see large expenses for a period of time to look after long-term care. That's just the reality. And so you want to build that into your financial modeling. I'll talk about how we do that in just a second. Now, when it comes to the average duration of long-term care, this is actually not a bad news story. So if you look at the typical time periods in long-term care, we're talking the average duration 2 to 4 years, right? So we're talking the latter stages of somebody's life expectancy. 50% need care for less than a year. 30% need care for 1 to 3 years, and about 20% need care for more than 3 years. So as you can see, it's not like we're funding these additional costs for long periods of time. They're usually for more concentrated short-term periods. Where the pressure, though, often comes from is the fact that sometimes there are facilities not available to have, let's say in a couple situation, both living in the same facility. So you can easily see situations where in a couple scenario, one's still living in the family home or condo, and the other in the couple is now in long-term care. So now you're duplicating housing and shelter costs. That's where it can get really, really expensive. So when it comes to financial modeling, in my estimation, and we do this in all the planning, you want to underpromise and overdeliver. So you want to be a little bit more cautious and conservative and maybe model worst case. So the way you model worst case in this scenario is you look at a duration probably of at least 3 years, and you look at probably the upper end of the expenditure category. Okay, now some of you might be asking the question, like, Shaun, what's the probability that this kind of scenario is going to play out? Well, Sun Life actually took a look at that. They looked at couples 50 years of age, and they said, what is the probability that one in the couple would need long-term care throughout their life expectancy. And the percentage was 92%. This is not an uncommon scenario, so it's important that you build that into your retirement income planning. Now, the other downstream impact is not only are there costs, surprise expenses for mom or dad in this situation, but in a first to die situation, there can be costs as well. So in this situation, a parent, let's say, passes away, mom and dad are the survivor. Now family have to step in to support mom or dad through healthcare issues, psychological issues, just being there as a support. But that actually has downstream financial impacts on the family. There may be income interruption, job, career interruption, challenges emotionally and psychologically, and stress on that family that's offering support to mom or dad. I'm not saying that they don't want to offer that support, but the reality is there are impacts. And there are important conversations that families need to have in advance so that these don't become surprise expenses. They become intentional costs built into the plan just in case these issues have to be dealt with. So what are some of the key planning considerations in this very costly potential expense in retirement? So, the estimated costs per person could be $80,000 to $120,000 over a 3-year period. Consider setting aside capital in your retirement income planning, anywhere from at least $100,000 to $150,000 in your retirement plan to deal with those costs. And long-term care insurance could potentially be an offset to those high costs, but what I find personally is most clients say, listen, I've got home equity or real estate. If need be, we can use the equity in the real estate to pay for these extraordinary costs. Plus, we can access, the equity tax effectively. It's not a taxable income to us, whether we sell the property or borrow against it. So let's take a look at a snap projection to see how we model this for a client. So this is Bob and Beth's situation. The purple is their long-term cash flow needs for the retirement years. And they built in the early phase of the retirement another $15,000 of expenses on an after-tax basis for traveling. So this was kind of their version of the go-go years. They eventually push that out to age 75 and then arbitrarily stop at expenditure allocation. And then in the latter stages of the retirement, you can see these 3 years of balloon payments. Effectively, what we had here was $60,000 of costs on an after-tax basis for a 3-year period for long-term care for one of them. So they built that into their model. So, that cost ends up being, fairly high. If you look at the additional costs there, the additional expense is $133,000. That's $60,000 today, indexed at 3%. Then another additional cost of $137,000, and then a final additional cost of $141,000. This is for the long-term care in the couple. Now, what that did is it put pressure on the portfolio in the front end here, but also at the back end. And you can see that if we didn't build in these expenses, they actually had redundant capital. They had more capital than they needed to fund their retirement plan. But when we built in the long-term care costs in the model, they had gone through all of their financial assets theoretically by their 92nd year, and they're running a little bit of shortfalls against home equity at that point. So they were okay with that. What they really appreciated is they built in that worst case scenario. They could see what the pressure might be on the financial assets. They still could see that family would have legacy assets that would go to them, and they had enough money to deal with those expense allocations long-term in retirement. So it's great peace of mind. I always recommend clients to take a look at this aspect as part of their retirement income planning because it's a reality. 92% of couples are going to have one in the couple go through these cost experiences. Now, the next surprise expense category is inflation. Yes, inflation is a surprise expense. Now, I'm sure you know this, but of course, inflation increases the costs of things over time. It's just a reality in our financial planning and our retirement income planning. But I'm always shocked at the disconnect for people between the understanding of the reality of inflation and actually putting in place strategies that will protect them long term in their retirement years. Here's a real big challenge for people. We temperamentally become more conservative when we retire and as we get older. Yet the reality is one of the best hedges against inflationary impacts is equity or stock, high quality stock ownership. It's a wonderful way to hedge against inflation. I'll talk about why in a moment. Yet most people feel compelled to become more cautious in their retirement, and as a result, the purchasing power of their assets gets eroded over time. I often say to people, great strategy, you can sleep at night, but you're going broke safely. You're way more concerned about short-term market volatility when in fact the biggest risk for you is the long-term erosion of your purchasing power. And so we need to wrestle with that in our plans, and that's what we try to do, is strike that balance between what do we need to do to protect your assets in the short term from market and economic volatility, while at the same time, when you need to deliver money to your bank account 10 years from now, that it's held its purchasing power. So let's make this just super practical. What's the inflation drag on retirement income at 2.5% inflation? So year one, we've got $60,000 of after-tax income. Year 10, $60,000 needs to be $76,000. Year 20, your $60,000 needs to grow to $98,000. That's what the costs are going to be. So your plan has to cope with that. And year 25, your $60,000 now is $112,000 of expenditures. So this is the reality. This is very basic stuff. But when you start looking at the long-term erosion of purchasing power and what things will actually cost, it's really critical to build in strategies. So one strategy is just you spend less. I mean, you begin cinching in your expenditure and budget. But that's not what people want to do. Obviously, that's not a great solution. If you have budget flexibility, awesome. But what solutions make sense for most people? Now, this chart looks at the average annual real return after inflation return of various investment asset classes from 1975 to 2025. And you can see over here that the S&P 500 U.S. stocks averaged 7.3% on an after inflation basis. The broad Canadian stock market averaged 6.2%. Commercial real estate averaged 6%, residential real estate 5%, gold a paltry 2%. Commodities in general did 3.5%. Bonds, not very good. And then cash, GICs, were underwater on a long-term basis. They didn't cope at all with inflation. So clearly stocks are a great hedge. The problem with stocks is the short-term volatility. So the way you deal with the volatility is you make sure you have a plan. Your plan will map out what money is needed in what amounts in what time periods. And invariably when I work with clients, we can define for them when they need the money, and often they'll have money that they don't need for a long time. And it's that particular time period where you can put in place high quality stock investments, whether it's stock ETFs or individual stocks as an example. And so why stocks? Well, stocks, of course, for dominant companies that have inelastic demand, meaning there's demand for their goods and services and good economic cycles are bad, it's just a necessary service. Over time, as inflation goes up, they can successfully pass on those increased costs to the consumer. So the consumer bears that cost. And of course, as their cash flow goes up by passing on the inflationary cost to the consumer, their revenue and profitability goes up, and that will drive higher share prices over time. The other benefit is that often these companies will increase their dividend distributions as well as their revenue streams go up. So stocks over the long term can be a wonderful hedge against inflationary pressure. It's not the only strategy, but it's a very important one. And when you have a retirement income plan prepared, it'll give you guidance as to what percentage of your portfolio you can park into these assets to get the inflation hedge that you need. Now, the third category of a surprise expense is government pensions. And you might be saying, what do you mean surprise expense? Pension is an income stream. And yes, that's correct. But if you make your decisions incorrectly, it's going to cost you money. I mean, it's going to be a drag on your long-term retirement income plan. So a financial drag to me is like an expense. And the problem with the government pension decision is that a lot of people make the decision based on gut feel and not about the laws of probability and not from a financial standpoint. They really just sort of transition in retirement, apply for their benefits, and don't even give it a second thought. The vast majority of people will take their Canada pension plan when they retire. So if they retire before age 65, they'll take it before age 65. And the vast majority of people will take their old age security benefits. At 65, it's almost like an automatic, and they don't even question it. And yet sometimes it's important to question some of these broad assumptions, because if you don't, not for everyone, but for many people, it's going to be a drag on your retirement income plan. So the grand question around government benefits is when to take your benefits. Do you actually elect for a deferral at age 70 that will increase your benefits by 42%, and that's 42% indexed to inflation? Do you defer your old age security benefits, which will increase the benefit by 36% by your age 70, and that's indexed as well? Are you using the laws of probability, or using gut feel and just a sense of what you think is right, or are you just simply just transitioning without thinking a lot about it? Well, let's talk about some of the planning points around this decision. So first of all, these pensions are longevity insurance. They're indexed and they'll last as long as you do. And certainly if you have longevity in your family, I think you do want to think seriously about the deferral of government benefits. Secondly, by deferring the benefits, it creates a larger tax deaccumulation window. And of course, if you push those benefits out to age 70 and lets you retire at age 60, 65, that reduced income from government benefits will give you the opportunity to pull more money out of your registered accounts, your RIF accounts, your RSP accounts, more tax effectively. And I can tell you there's been many, many scenarios where we've worked with clients who are running some minor shortfalls over the length of their retirement planning scenarios. And when we introduced the deferral of government benefits, drawing money from their registered accounts more tax effectively, that 1-2 punch actually made a huge difference in their planning, and they were fully funding their long-term plans. As well, the potentially lower taxes over the long term. So if we look at the average tax bracket and the taxes paid between different scenarios, often the larger deaccumulation tax window and the deferral of benefits ends up being very positive for people. And if you live past age 80, delaying almost always results in more lifetime income. You know, if you're healthy at age 65, it's very likely that you're going to live to age 86. That's average life expectancy. And there's over a 40% chance that you're going to live to age 90. And if you are a female, average life expectancy is age 89. And there's a 55% chance that you're going to live until age 90. So the probability is that you will be a long-term winner financially by deferring government benefits. And so don't leave money on the table. Wrestle with this issue. I'm not saying you have to defer. You just want to make sure that you're just doing a Ben Franklin. What are the positives and the negatives? Have I had a retirement planner run the numbers for me so that I can make an educated decision on what's best for my circumstances? So the last surprise expense category we're going to talk about in this presentation is surprise expenses attached to your estate plan, or surprise expenses that happen because you don't have a well thought through estate plan. Estate planning is one of those areas where it is mind-blowing the amount of additional expenses that can take place, whether it's legal fees, whether it's probate costs, whether it's tax costs, administration costs, and a lot of that is because of poor planning, or not reviewing the plan, or even more importantly, not bringing the family into your planning discussions, or not wanting to have important family conversations about care issues and estate planning issues. It's a really big area. Millions and millions and millions of dollars go wasted every year across this country because people are not attending to this particular area of expense control. So when we talk about this area, the first thing I would say is make sure you have a plan. It's absolutely critical that you meet with your lawyer, meet with your financial planner, begin mapping out the plan. Now, the reason why it's very important to have your financial planner involved in this is because when you map out a financial plan, that plan is going to give you some pretty concrete information about what kind of estate you're going to be dealing with. What are the tax liabilities? Where will the accounts be at in terms of your TFSA values, your real estate values, your registered account values? What is the potential tax liability on your estate? All that information needs to be known before you can get into the planning phase with your lawyer. And then ultimately, there's going to be some tax planning that will come out of that. Now, if you have a plan, you're likely going to be able to reduce overall costs to the estate because there's some proactive planning you can engage in. You can reduce tax costs potentially, and proactive decision making is always the preferred option. And make sure you review and update. Now, what I mean by that is a great example in estate planning is, mom and dad went through the effort of building an estate plan. They met with a lawyer, they met with a financial planner, and when they had finished the whole exercise, they were really satisfied that they had a solid plan that hit all the major planning points that were important to them. And then 6 years later, mom and dad walked into their financial institution's office and the account representative said, "Oh, I noticed that you have your estate as a beneficiary of your RSP accounts and TFSA accounts. And what you could do is you could have your kids as listed beneficiaries, and then the money doesn't have to go through probate. It's very quick. There's less costs attached to it. Why don't we just amend your account agreements and make the kids the direct beneficiaries? Well, all sounds awesome. So they go ahead and do that. Here's the problem. A few years before that, there was a lot of effort that went into the estate plan. Some of the estate plan had to do with charitable giving, helping the grandchildren, setting up trusts. And so the priority at that point was tax planning and testamentary trust planning and ongoing legacy planning. And for all of those things to be accomplished, the money needed to go to the estate. The money should not be redirected directly to the beneficiary, because much of the planning cannot get done, right, from a legal and tax compliance standpoint unless the money actually goes to the estate. So in one fell swoop, just a few signatures, mom and dad completely undid, right, all the great planning that was done for all the right reasons. So it's really important that that review happen on a regular basis, and that it's done in the context of the planning that you put so much time and effort putting into. Have a family meeting. I don't know how often I've shared this with clients, is that you want to have difficult conversations and talk about difficult things. What happens if mom or dad lose their capacity, their cognitive function? What about healthcare issues and who's going to do what and when? Are the powers of attorney up to date? Do you have a living will? Which family member is going to take primary responsibility for those things? Mom and dad, have you put in some financial ability within your planning to compensate your power of attorney or your executor fairly for the work that they're going to do? Particularly in the area of power of attorney, it's not completely clear in many jurisdictions across the country what the compensation could be. You want to build that into the power of attorney agreement. Often family members are sacrificing greatly. So when I talk about these things, it sounds like there's a lot of costs attached to it. But really the reality is, if you do effective planning, you're going to save money. And when you take a look at family meeting, there's also discussions around asset protection. You are going to save money for the family and save money from a context of what happens when things go south. What happens when the kids or the grandchildren, but the kids, let's say, have marriage, ends up going up in flames. There's a divorce, or maybe there's a bankruptcy of a business. You can actually protect assets through the estate plan by having those assets go to trusts that are segregated from creditors and that are asset protected from dissolving of a marriage, as an example. Some really important planning opportunities. And then you might have some intentional gifting you'd like to do. So part of the family discussions, and I have these discussions all the time with clients. I have clients who have redundant capital. They have money that they will never use. They will always have it on their balance sheet. And rather than having the money going to their family when they're gone in a last to die scenario, they have the capacity to begin gifting to the kids or the grandchildren now and not impacting their own income security. And there's all kinds of financial benefits attached to that, but some amazing psychological and emotional benefits, seeing their family benefit from the gifting they're doing now and not when they pass away. And there's also some charitable giving opportunities for many families that are massive. So in a year of death tax filing, there's an unlimited charitable bequest you can make, and you can greatly reduce the tax costs attached to your estate at that time. So in estate planning, there is a lot of money on the table to be saved, but if you don't do proper planning, you're going to end up having all kinds of expenses and costs that are incurred that didn't have to be incurred. They are really, really important planning principles. And when you begin doing your retirement income plan is going to give you some great guidance on, will you have an estate to worry about? How much tax liability will be attached to it? Are there some proactive strategies you can begin doing now? Do trusts have a role to play in your current planning? All awesome discussions. You work very hard to build up your estate and your wealth. So why don't you work just as hard to make sure you pass it on, or do things now that can reduce costs today? If you want to find out ways of sidestepping these surprise expenses in retirement, make sure you go to the show notes. There's a link back to our website. You can have a complimentary meeting to find out more about our retirement income planning services and how our planning can help you save costs in retirement.